A decision no one understood. Kevin Matthews had never been a man to follow the crowd. He was quiet, stubborn, and, above all, driven by his own sense of right and wrong. The town of Fairview had always found him strange. He lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts, drove an old pickup truck that rattled like a dying engine, and spent more time working on construction sites than socializing. He wasn't married, wasn't dating, and as far as anyone knew, he had no real friends. So when news spread that Kevin Matthews was adopting 9 black girls from the foster system, the town didn't just whisper. They laughed. They mocked. They predicted his failure before he even had a chance to begin. "He's out of his damn mind," said Ed Harper, the former police chief, shaking his head at the diner where town gossip thrived. "A single man taking in 9 kids? He'll be drowning in regret before the ink on the papers dries." "A fool and a liar," Janice Walker added, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on her coffee cup. "He won't last a month. You watch, he'll be begging the state to take them back." Others agreed. Some questioned his intentions. Some whispered that it wasn't right for a white man to be raising black children. Some even made darker insinuations, their words laced with venom and prejudice. Kevin heard it all. And he didn't care. Because he wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for the girls. They had been shuffled through foster homes, passed around like burdens no one wanted to bear. Some had suffered neglect. Others had endured much worse. Their only request, the one thing they begged for, was to stay together. But the system didn't care about promises made to children. The girls had already been marked for separation, assigned to different homes across the state. In a matter of weeks, they would be torn apart. Unless someone stepped in. Unless someone fought for them. And Kevin had. He had spent months navigating the red tape, enduring invasive background checks, financial inspections, psychological evaluations. Every single meeting, every single form came with the same unspoken question: why would a man like you do this? And every time, he gave them the same answer. Because no one else will. The day of the court hearing, the atmosphere was tense. The judge sat behind a massive wooden bench, peering at Kevin through rimmed glasses, skepticism deepening the lines on his face. "Mr. Matthews," he began, flipping through the case file. "You understand that adopting 1 child is a tremendous responsibility? That adopting 9, as a single man, raises serious concerns?" Kevin's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. "I understand, Your Honor." The judge sighed, glancing at the 9 girls seated behind Kevin. 9 pairs of eyes, filled with uncertainty and fear. "Many believe this is a mistake," the judge continued. "That it's impossible." Kevin met the judge's gaze head-on. "With respect, Your Honor, those people don't know me." The judge hesitated. For a long moment, there was silence. Then he picked up his pen. One by one, he signed the papers. Each signature a promise. Each stroke of the pen a defiance against the town that had already given up on him. The courtroom door creaked as they walked out together, Kevin and the 9 girls who were now his daughters. No one cheered. No one congratulated him. They just stared. Because the world didn't believe in men like Kevin Matthews. But soon, they would fear him. The drive home. The truck ride was heavy with silence. The girls were crammed into the back seat of Kevin's old pickup, their bodies tense, their expressions guarded. Kyra, the oldest at 11, sat in the middle with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Sierra, the quietest, pressed her forehead against the window, watching the trees blur past. Lila, the youngest, clutched a tattered teddy bear so tight that its remaining eye looked ready to pop off. Kevin cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "So, anyone hungry? There's a pizza place a few miles up." No response. Kyra let out a slow, exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes. You don't have to do that. Do what? Pretend. Kevin kept his hands on the wheel. I'm not pretending. Kyra gave a humorless chuckle. Right. Just like all the others weren't pretending either. He didn't need to ask what she meant. They had seen this before. The smiling faces. The warm words. The false hope. And then, when things got hard, those same people abandoned them. Look, Kyra continued, her voice hard, if you don't want us, just say it now. Don't waste our time. The other girls shifted uncomfortably, staring at their laps. Kevin took a deep breath. Then he pulled the truck over. The tires crunched against the gravel as he turned to face them. You think I don't want you? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Kyra didn't blink. I think you'll get tired of us. Kevin studied her. She had too much experience with disappointment for an 11-year-old. He turned to the rest of them. You all feel that way? No one spoke. But they didn't have to. He exhaled slowly. I can't change what's happened to you. I can't promise that life will be easy. But I'll tell you this, I'm not leaving. Silence. Then Kyra leaned back, arms still crossed. We'll see. Kevin started the truck again, pulling back onto the road. For the rest of the drive, no one spoke. But when they finally pulled into the driveway of their new home, no one asked to leave. The house that would become a home. Kevin had spent months preparing. The house wasn't big, but he had made it work. There were 3 bedrooms set up with bunk beds, colorful sheets, and nightstands filled with books and stuffed animals. He had built a large dining table himself, big enough for 10. And yet, when the girls stepped inside, they didn't rush in. They hesitated. Kyra surveyed the space with narrowed eyes. This house got rules? Kevin nodded. Yeah. 3 of them. The girls waited. 1. This is your home. You don't have to ask permission to be here. Some of them exchanged glances. 2. We respect each other. No matter what. Kyra snorted. You ever lived with 9 girls before? Kevin smirked. Not yet. A few chuckles. Progress. And the last rule? Kyra asked, arms still crossed. Kevin's expression turned serious. We don't quit on each other. Silence. He saw the flicker of emotion on their faces, hope, fear, longing, disbelief, before Kyra looked away. Okay, she said softly. And just like that, it began. The town thought Kevin had made a mistake. They thought he would break under the weight of it all. They thought he would fail. But they had no idea what was coming. Because in the years ahead, those same people who laughed at him would one day be begging for mercy. And when that day came, Kevin and his daughters would be ready. The storm begins. Kevin Matthews didn't expect gratitude. He didn't expect warmth. And he certainly didn't expect the 9 girls now living under his roof to trust him overnight. But what he hadn't anticipated was just how much damage had been done to them. Trauma wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was silent in the way Kyra, the oldest, scanned every room like she was expecting someone to attack. Sometimes, it was hidden in the way Sierra flinched when he raised his voice, even if it wasn't directed at her. Sometimes, it was quiet, like Lila's refusal to sleep without the dull glow of a nightlight, as if the darkness itself could hurt her. These girls had been through hell, and Kevin had walked into their lives expecting to patch them up with patience and kindness. He was wrong. Patience wasn't enough. Kindness wasn't enough. Because Fairview, the town he had lived in his entire life, had already decided that Kevin was a fool. And it was about to prove him wrong in the worst way possible. The town's response. It started with whispers. At the grocery store. In the church pews. In the schools. People talked. Did you hear? He actually brought them home. I give him 3 months. Then they'll be back in the system. I don't care what he says, something ain't right about a single man raising 9 little black girls. Some people didn't bother to whisper. A week after the girls moved in, Kevin pulled into his driveway after a long shift at the construction site to find a note taped to his front door. Leave while you can. Just those 4 words, scrawled in thick, black marker. Kevin tore it down, jaw tight, and stepped inside. He didn't mention it to the girls. They had enough to worry about. But he should have known. This was only the beginning. The first blow. Kevin had always known Fairview had its prejudices. It was one of those towns where tradition wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. People didn't like change. They didn't like outsiders. And they certainly didn't like a white man adopting 9 black children and treating them as his own. So when the call came from the school principal, he knew it wasn't good news. Mr. Matthews, Principal Hartley said, his voice flat. We need to talk. Kevin leaned against his truck, phone pressed to his ear. About? There's been a complaint. Kevin's eyes narrowed. About what? There was a long pause. I'd rather discuss this in person. Kevin exhaled sharply. Fine. I'm on my way. The meeting. When Kevin arrived at Fairview Elementary, it felt like walking into a courtroom. The principal sat behind his desk, stiff-backed, hands folded neatly. Across from him, 2 PTA mothers, Janice Walker and Linda Crosby, sat with their pursed lips and disapproving stares. Kevin took the empty chair, his boots scraping loudly against the floor as he stretched out his legs. He didn't say anything. Let them talk first. Principal Hartley cleared his throat. Mr. Matthews, there's concern among parents regarding your daughters. Kevin raised an eyebrow. What concern? Linda frowned. There are cultural differences. Kevin gave her a long, blank stare. Cultural differences? Janice sniffed. We're just saying that a man like you might not be equipped to raise them properly. It's not natural. They should be placed in homes that understand their backgrounds. Kevin clenched his jaw. You mean black homes? Silence. The principal shifted uncomfortably. No one is saying that exactly, Mr. Matthews. Then what exactly are you saying? Kevin cut in, voice cold. Because as far as I can tell, my daughters have been attending school, doing their work, and staying out of trouble. If there's a real problem, let's hear it. Another long silence. Janice clicked her tongue. Mr. Matthews, you seem defensive. Kevin leaned forward. You're damn right I'm defensive. Because it sounds like you're telling me that no matter how much love I give them, no matter how hard I work to make sure they have a home, it'll never be enough. That I'm wrong for keeping them together. Janice didn't respond. Linda pursed her lips. We just think it would be better for them. Kevin exhaled slowly. You don't give a damn about what's better for them. Principal Hartley cleared his throat. Mr. Matthews. Kevin stood. You can tell the PDA to mind its own business, he said flatly. My girls aren't going anywhere. And with that, he walked out. The warning. That night, Kevin woke up to shouting outside his window. He stumbled out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the front door. Outside, a group of 3 men stood at the edge of his property. Ed Harper was among them, the former police chief. The moment Kevin stepped onto the porch, Ed took a step forward, tipping his hat. Evening, Kevin. Kevin crossed his arms. Something I can help you with? Ed smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Just a friendly warning. Kevin's fingers curled into fists. That so? Ed took another step forward, lowering his voice. You don't belong here, boy. Kevin's blood ran cold. Boy. A word meant to remind him exactly where he stood. Kevin's voice was quiet when he spoke. I was born and raised in this town. Ed chuckled. Then you should know better. The men behind him murmured in agreement. Kevin felt the anger rise, but he swallowed it down. You're wasting your time, he said. Because I'm not going anywhere. Ed studied him. Then, slowly, he tipped his hat again. Suit yourself, he said lightly. Just don't be surprised when this town turns against you. Then they walked away. Kevin stood on that porch for a long time. He looked out at the darkened street, at the distant glow of porch lights from houses where people had already judged him guilty. They wanted him to fail. They wanted him to break. But Kevin had never been a man who broke easy. And if Fairview wanted a fight? They had just started one. The girl's reaction. When Kevin stepped inside, Kyra was waiting for him. She had seen everything. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, softly, she said, Told you. Kevin sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, he admitted. You did. Kyra tilted her head. So what now? Kevin looked at her. And he smiled. Now, he said. We make them regret underestimating us. Because this wasn't just about a town that wanted to push him out. It was about a corrupt system that had already failed these girls once. And Kevin had just made the biggest mistake of his life in their eyes. He had given those girls something to believe in. And that? That made him dangerous. The battle lines are drawn. Kevin Matthews was no fool. He knew the moment the town turned on him. Fairview had always been a place that clung to tradition with an iron grip. People liked things the way they had always been, unchanged, predictable, and controlled. Kevin and his 9 adopted daughters? They were a threat to that. A single white man raising 9 black girls? It wasn't just unusual. To some folks, it was an insult. And if there was one thing Kevin knew about people who were used to having power, it was that they didn't take kindly to losing control. What he hadn't expected was just how far they were willing to go to break him. And it all started with his job. The first strike. Kevin had been working construction in Fairview for over 15 years. He was one of the best in the business, and everyone knew it. He took the worst, most run-down houses and turned them into homes that people could be proud of. He wasn't rich, but he worked hard. Paid his bills. Never caused trouble. Until now. 2 weeks after his confrontation with the school principal and the PDA, Kevin got a call from his boss, Dan Carter. It wasn't a long call. Just one sentence. Kevin, we're letting you go. Silence. Kevin gripped the phone tighter. What? Dan sighed. Look, it's not my decision, okay? Some of the higher-ups, they don't like all the attention you're bringing. Kevin's jaw clenched. Attention? You know exactly what I mean. Kevin swallowed back his frustration. Dan, I got 9 kids to feed. I know, man. I know. There was guilt in Dan's voice. Kevin could hear it. But guilt wouldn't pay the bills. Look, Dan added, voice softer now. Between you and me, I'd get out of Fairview. It's not safe for you here. Kevin let out a bitter laugh. I've lived here my whole life, Dan. Where exactly am I supposed to go? Dan was quiet for a moment. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he said, then just, be careful. And the line went dead. The fallout. The moment Kevin stepped outside, Kyra was waiting for him. She had a way of watching him, studying his face for signs of trouble before he even opened his mouth. "You lost your job," she said flatly. Kevin ran a hand over his face. "Yeah." Kyra exhaled sharply. "They're coming for you." Kevin glanced toward the house, where the younger girls were playing in the yard. Lila was helping her sister braid her hair, and Sierra was scribbling in a notebook. They were still kids. They didn't deserve this. "I know," Kevin muttered. "But they're not gonna win." Kyra folded her arms. "And how exactly do you plan on stopping them?" Kevin met her gaze. "We fight back." The smear campaign. Kevin had never been the kind of man to back down from a challenge. But what came next wasn't just an attack on him. It was an attack on his family. The rumors started small. At first, it was just whispers in the grocery store, the gas station, the post office. Then, it got worse. People started looking at him differently. The cashiers hesitated before handing him his change. His neighbors, people he had known since childhood, stopped waving when they saw him outside. And then came the worst part. One night, Kevin was sitting on his front porch when his phone buzzed. An anonymous email. Subject: "You should be investigated." The message? "Men like you don't adopt little girls out of kindness. People are watching." Kevin's blood ran cold. Because he knew exactly what they were implying. And he wasn't wrong. Because the very next morning, Child Protective Services showed up at his door. The investigation. The knock on the door was sharp and authoritative. Kevin opened it to find two CPS workers standing on his porch. The woman in front, Ms. Jordan, was young, with a clipboard in one hand and a forced smile on her face. "Mr. Matthews?" she asked. Kevin nodded slowly. "Yeah. We received a complaint," she said. Kevin stiffened. "A complaint about what?" Ms. Jordan cleared her throat. "We need to speak to your daughters." Kevin stepped in front of the door. "Not without a warrant." Ms. Jordan hesitated. The man beside her, a tall, broad-shouldered agent, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Matthews, refusing to cooperate isn't going to help your case." Kevin laughed dryly. "My case? What exactly am I being accused of?" The CPS workers exchanged glances. And that's when Kevin realized, they didn't even know. Someone had called in a false tip, and now CPS was here trying to find a reason to take his girls away. His stomach tightened. They weren't just trying to ruin him. They were trying to destroy his family. Kyra fights back. Kevin didn't even have to call the girls. They had already gathered behind him. Kyra stepped forward, arms crossed. "Are you here to take us?" Ms. Jordan blinked. "No one is taking anyone." "Then why are you here?" Kyra cut in. Ms. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. "We just need to ask a few questions." Kyra's jaw tightened. "We're fine." Lila, the youngest, clung to Kevin's leg. Sierra narrowed her eyes. "You people never showed up when we actually needed help." The words hung in the air like a slap. The CPS workers had no response to that. Kevin took a deep breath. "You've seen the girls," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They're fed. Clothed. They have a home. You have no reason to be here." Ms. Jordan hesitated, then sighed, nodding to her partner. "This won't be the last time we check in, Mr. Matthews." Kevin's jaw tensed. "I figured." They left without another word. And as their car pulled out of the driveway, Kyra turned to Kevin, arms still crossed. "They're not gonna stop," she muttered. Kevin exhaled, looking out at the town that had turned against him. "No," he said. "They're not." But if they thought they could scare him? They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Kevin wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his daughters. And there was nothing more dangerous than a father protecting his family. The storm before the war. Kevin Matthews had seen a lot of fights in his life. He had fought to make a name for himself. Fought to survive when money was tight. Fought to prove he was worthy of adopting 9 girls that no one else wanted. But this? This was different. This wasn't a bar fight or a tough month of bills. This was a war. And Fairview had just fired the first shots. The noose tightens. After CPS left, Kevin thought. Maybe he would get a moment to breathe. He was wrong. Because within a week, the attack started coming from every angle. His bank account was frozen due to a pending fraud investigation. The school suddenly claimed the girls had missing documents and threatened to expel them. The landlord of his rented house decided to sell the property and gave him a 30-day eviction notice. Kevin wasn't stupid. This wasn't a coincidence. This was planned. Someone, or some group of people, had made it their mission to break him. To make him give up. But Kevin Matthews was not the kind of man to surrender. A line in the sand. It was a Sunday night when Kevin sat the girls down at the dinner table. The air was thick with tension. Kyra leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. She knew something was coming. Sierra twirled her fork in her spaghetti, pretending not to care, but Kevin could see the way her fingers tightened. Lila, the youngest, sat close to Kendra, holding her hand for comfort. Kevin exhaled. "They're trying to get rid of us," he said plainly. "I won't sugarcoat it. They want us gone." Silence. Kyra snorted. "Tell us something we don't know." Kevin ignored the comment. "I lost my job. CPS was called on us. We're getting evicted. And now the school is trying to push you girls out." Sierra finally looked up. "So what do we do?" Kevin leaned forward. "We fight." Lila's eyes widened. "Like, a real fight?" Kevin smiled slightly. "Not with fists, baby girl. With our minds. Our words. Our actions." Kyra narrowed her eyes. "What's the plan?" Kevin's smile widened. "Step 1, he said. We take back control. The school showdown." Monday morning, Kevin walked into the Fairview Elementary School office like a man with nothing to lose. He was dressed sharp, black button-down, sleeves rolled up, steel-gray eyes locked in like a predator on the hunt. Behind him? His 9 daughters. And in his hand? A folder of evidence that would rip the school apart. The receptionist looked up and immediately paled. "Mr. Matthews. I want to speak to the principal," Kevin cut in. "Now." The receptionist hesitated. Kevin didn't blink. "If you don't get him out here, I'll walk into that office myself," he said calmly. The threat was clear. The receptionist hurried into the back, and less than a minute later, Principal Owens walked out. Kevin didn't waste time. "I have a problem," he said, dropping the folder onto the desk. "And you're going to fix it." Principal Owens frowned. "Mr. Matthews, if this is about the missing paperwork." Kevin leaned forward. "I know you think I'm an idiot," he said softly. "But I checked with the state myself. The girls' files are complete." Owens' face twitched. Kevin continued, voice deadly calm. "You made this up. You want to kick them out because you think I'll leave town if things get hard enough." The principal stayed silent. Kevin opened the folder. "I have a copy of every official school record. I also have emails from the adoption agency confirming all documents were legally transferred." Owens swallowed hard. "And just in case you thought you could brush this under the rug," Kevin added, sliding a USB drive across the desk, I also have recorded phone calls from a few teachers who told me how much pressure they were under to get rid of my girls. Owen's face turned pale white. Kevin leaned in closer. So here's what's going to happen. Owens didn't move. You're going to reinstate my daughters immediately. You're going to stop harassing them. And you're going to act like a decent human being from now on. The principal opened his mouth, then closed it. Kevin picked up the USB drive. Because if you don't, I'll go to the news, the school board, and the state government. Silence. Then. Owens slowly nodded. The war wasn't over. But Kevin had won this battle. A broken system exposed. Over the next 2 weeks, Kevin did not stop. He got a new job, one where the town had no control over him. He hired a lawyer to fight the eviction. And he took every piece of evidence he had and started sending it to reporters, civil rights organizations, and anyone who would listen. Then, one day, it happened. A national news station picked up the story. Kevin sat in his truck, watching the TV screen at a gas station. The headline? Single father fights corrupt town to protect his 9 adopted daughters, and wins. Kevin's heart hammered. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every single child and family that had ever been pushed down by the system. The town thought they could silence him. Instead, they had made him famous. And now? The whole world was watching. The backlash begins. The very next day, Kevin got a call. A blocked number. He hesitated, but answered. Silence. Then, a low, raspy voice whispered. You should have left while you had the chance. Click. The call ended. Kevin sat there, phone in his lap, breathing hard. They weren't backing down. And that was fine. Because neither was he. If Fairview wanted a war, they had just found their worst nightmare. A father with nothing left to lose. The war for Fairview. Kevin Matthews had thought he was prepared for anything. But he had underestimated how desperate Fairview would get. They weren't just fighting back. They were playing dirty. And now? Kevin wasn't just fighting for his daughters. He was fighting for his life. The threats escalate. It started small. Anonymous letters in the mailbox. Nasty messages spray-painted on the sidewalk in front of his house. Muttered slurs whenever he and the girls walked down the street. Then it got worse. One morning, Kevin woke up to find his truck's tires slashed. A week later, the garage door was set on fire in the middle of the night. Luckily, the flames didn't spread, but Kevin knew what this meant. This wasn't just about making him uncomfortable. They wanted him gone. And if scaring him away didn't work, they would destroy him. The girls refused to back down. Despite the escalating danger, Kevin refused to let his daughters live in fear. But he wasn't prepared for how fierce they had become. Kyra, the oldest, had once been the most skeptical of him. Now, she stood right beside him, watching, waiting, ready for war. They're scared, she told him one night, as they stood outside staring at the blackened marks on the garage door. Kevin sighed. Yeah, but scared people do stupid things. Kyra's jaw clenched. Good. Let them. Kevin chuckled. I should be the one protecting you, not the other way around. Kyra shook her head. You gave us a home. A real one. We're not gonna let them take it. Kevin looked at his daughter, this strong, fearless young woman, and felt a deep swell of pride. I guess we're in this together, then, he said. Kyra smirked. Damn right. Fairview's power structure cracks. While Kevin was handling threats at home, the exposure of Fairview's corruption was making waves nationwide. Journalists began digging into the town's history. And what they found was worse than anyone imagined. For decades, Fairview had been running a deeply corrupt system. Property tax fraud that stole money from working-class families. School district manipulation to push out black and low-income students. A police department with a history of brutality, one that had been covering up its crimes for years. The more reporters uncovered, the worse it got. Lawsuits started rolling in. State investigators descended on the town. And suddenly, the same people who once mocked Kevin were now panicking. The mayor's desperate offer. Kevin was sitting at the kitchen table one evening when his phone rang. Blocked number. He almost didn't answer. But something told him to pick up. Mr. Matthews. Kevin recognized the voice instantly. Mayor Douglas Fairbanks. The man who had run Fairview like a kingdom for 20 years. Kevin leaned back. To what do I owe the pleasure? A pause. Then. I think we should talk, Fairbanks said. Kevin smirked. Oh? About what? Another pause. Then, in a lowered, almost desperate voice. There's a way for all of this to end. Kevin's smirk vanished. The meeting. They met at a small, empty diner on the outskirts of town. Kevin walked in, his shoulders squared, ready for anything. Fairbanks was already seated at a booth, nursing a whiskey. The mayor looked tired. Kevin sat down across from him. All right. Talk. Fairbanks exhaled. You've made your point, he said. Fairview made a mistake. We shouldn't have come after you. Kevin laughed. Oh, it was just a mistake. Trying to ruin my life? Harassing my daughters? Fairbanks' jaw tightened. Then, slowly, he pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Kevin raised an eyebrow. What's this? Money. Kevin scoffed. You think you can buy me off? Fairbanks leaned forward. I'm offering you a way out, he said, voice low. Take the money. Leave town. And all of this goes away. Kevin stared at him. Then, he grabbed the envelope and threw it onto the floor. Fairbanks flinched. Kevin smiled coldly. Let me tell you something, Mayor. He leaned in. I'm not leaving. Fairbanks' face darkened. You don't understand who you're messing with. Kevin's smile widened. Neither do you. And with that, he stood up and walked out. The town's breaking point. The very next night, Kevin was woken by screaming. His heart stopped. He jumped out of bed, rushing downstairs. The girls were already gathered in the living room, eyes wide with fear. And outside? Flames. Their truck was on fire. Kevin's blood ran cold. The town had just crossed the line. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was an open act of war. Kevin turned to his daughters, voice calm but firm. Go upstairs, he said. Now. Kyra opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. Something in Kevin's eyes told her this wasn't the time. Silently, the girls obeyed. Kevin grabbed his phone. And then, for the first time in his life, he called the FBI. The final stand begins. That night, Kevin sat on the porch, watching the embers of his burned truck smoldering in the driveway. His hands were tight fists. His anger was a living thing inside him. They thought they could scare him off. But all they had done was ignite something far worse. Because now, Kevin Matthews was done playing defense. It was time to end this war. And Fairview was about to burn.